Namaste. Let me start with two anecdotes, both with Chariji Maharaj. Way back in 2010, there was one functionary seminar that was organized in Babaji Memorial Ashram, Manapakam. So I was one of the designated speakers, and I had been given a topic by Chariji Maharaj to speak about, and I had been preparing for almost 4 or 5 days or so. So one of the days I was seated in the kitchen area, which is just behind the area where he used to eat. Those who are familiar with cottage would know. And suddenly he just walked through and asked, "What are you doing?" So I just mentioned that I am preparing for the talk. So he asked, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm referring your talks and taking notes and all that." So he just said, "Prakash, whatever book you are referring to, almost all Abhyasis in all probability would have already read that. So what is the point in quoting from what is already said? Instead, what you should do is to see how best you can speak from your personal experience, because that is more authentic. Quoting from the masters is okay, but since there is no value addition there, why don't you look at saying something that would add value to what the participants are going to get from?" The second was another interesting session. Every Sunday after the satsang, many of you are familiar with Manapakam, would know that I would go on the stage to make announcements. And normally after the announcements are done, the media team would always prod to make Charji Maharaj to speak. And I used to be the person who has to go and do that job. So after one such Sunday satsang, after the announcements, I just went to him and then asked, "Would you like to talk?" First he said no. And then after a gap of few seconds, he said, "Yes, I want to speak." And then he spoke for about 20-25 minutes or so. Once we came back to the cottage, I was a bit curious, I just asked him first, "Master, you said you don't want to speak and then you spoke. What happened?" He said, "Prakash, during the satsang, whatever I actually wanted to communicate, I transmitted to these people, the BSCs. But I was not very sure if anyone had caught it. So I had to speak again to confirm that what I had transmitted has reached them through words." So many times what happens is the unspoken words, the thing that you would like to communicate. For example, there is in some way a vibratory field that sets in the moment someone starts preparing for a topic with a specific audience. And if the vibratory field we are tuned in, it is in some way possible that you would be sometimes going through a talk and you'll be almost second guessing what the speaker may be speaking. So what tends to happen is that in some way there is a vibratory frequency match that happens. And then you are able to sort of tune in into what the speaker is about to say, and you're able to add more value to the talk because you're able to listen better. And the whole thing boils down to what I would personally call as value systems. Let me use one acronym here, which would set the base for my talk. The acronym could be in 3 letters called V, C, and D. V here stands for values. C stands for character. And D stands for DNA. And it's all about moving up the value chain from values to character to the DNA. What are the difference? Let me give you another anecdote or example from the learning fraternity for me to drive home this point better. Let's assume that there is one apartment complex and there are about 100 to 200 apartments there, and then they have a common swimming pool out there. And in one of the apartments, which is in the ground floor, there is a child which is about 1 year old. The child always is curiously watching people because the swimming pool is so close by. It just sees people floating on water from one end to another and moving back. And out of its own curiosity, one day it somehow manages to escape the guiding eyes of their parents and then moves in and is about to step into the swimming pool or crawl into the swimming pool. As it's about to crawl into the pool, the father suddenly becomes alert, comes out and pulls the kid up. What would have happened if the child had crawled into the water? We all know what would have happened without such a help. The child goes through a situation what is known as a state of ignorance. It is also called in learning parlance as unconscious incompetence. The child didn't know that it had to know something called as swimming for it to be able to float on water. Just moving from one place to another on top of water is not something which just like that happens. It comes out of a lot of practice. So now, like that, whenever we are faced in any situation when we are never faced before, we go through a similar situation or what is called as we are caught in an ignorant situation, or our ignorance is sort of shown to the world, or our unconscious incompetence. Unconscious incompetence means I didn't know that I don't know. I'm not aware that I'm not aware. For example, a person who has never been exposed to a spiritual path which can take him to God or self-realization faster, and he's only used to other practices which hasn't really given him a glimpse of what can happen in a spiritual path. When you first expose him, he sort of gets actually exposed, which means he's ignorant of such a possibility. And then he goes through what is called as unconscious incompetence. And from there, we all tend to normally move to the next level. The first level, as I said, is ignorance or unconscious incompetence. The second level is what we call as awareness or conscious incompetence. Now, the kid in the given story knows that for it to float on water, it has to know something called as swimming. It still doesn't know swimming, but it knows that it needs to know something called as swimming for it to be able to move on water. Likewise, for a person who is getting out of a religious system and then wanting to deepen the process of self-realization or God realization, he is now aware that this is what he doesn't know. So he moves to the second stage of what we call as conscious incompetence. Now I know that I don't know. Earlier, I didn't know that I didn't know. Now I move to I know that I don't know. This is where we come to in many situations when a speaker or somebody is sharing from their experience. Suddenly we get exposed to something we have never heard before. We are caught with ignorance, and that's where ego comes as a major block. Who is he to tell me what I don't know? Or how can he say something which makes me feel uncomfortable? And that acts as a very big block. That acts as a spiritual block as well. Master several times has said, Daji has said several times, once you cross the heart region, the only thing that will stop you from surrender and further progress is the ego, which stops complete acceptance. Let's take the same case of the child. Now the child knows that it doesn't know swimming and it has no swimming for it to move on top of water. It has two options in front of it. At least two options. The option one is say that, okay, I don't need to learn what is the swimming and forget and move on with life. Many of us would never need a chance for us to learn swimming because we are land-based people and rarely we have to face a situation where we need to know swimming. Let's assume that the child wants to learn swimming. Now it moves to the third stage of the learning curve, what is called as conscious competence. Now I'm very clear I have to learn swimming. So a conscious competence is the period in which someone builds up the competency. And why do you need a competency? I'll come to that a bit later. And how does it connect back to values? So now the child knows that if it has to float on water, it has to learn swimming. And to learn swimming, it has to either learn it on its own or go through a coach or someone who is able to teach it swimming. For example, it goes to a coach and the coach sort of put the child through a process of how to swim for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever. This is what happens for a person who wants to move into the space of self-realization or God realization. He learns the concept of meditation, say for example, heartfulness meditation. And then he sort of brought into the system. He commences the 3 introduction sittings and then goes through the process, understands the importance of the practice, and then starts going deeper and deeper and deeper. It's much, much, much longer when a child is able to jump into the water and it's able to swim as long as it wants without having to face any difficulty whatsoever, despite the kind of water or the terrain it has to face, whether it's a rough water, whether it's a sea, whether it's a really, sort of an uphill swim. If it is able to swim without even having to remember how to swim, it has raised the 4th level, what is called as unconscious competency, or what we call as expertise. The way in which Chariji Maharaj once explained, a time will come, Daji has also recently spoken about it. A time will come when you jump into meditation, experiences cease to exist. Because once I remember I was in Manapakam cottage and there was one preceptor from overseas. So he asked Chariji Maharaj a question. So last 3 weeks, I haven't had any experiences whatsoever in the sittings that I have been taking while you are here in Manapakam. So Chariji Maharaj just looked at him and said, even to expect an experience is lack of faith, because meditation is all about waiting for something to happen, and that something, what it happens, if it is only based on experience, then our interpretation of what spirituality is very shallow. That's what he said. So a time will come when Daji once said that you just dive into a deep pool. There is no sign that anyone has even jumped into the water. He just cuts through the water as if you cut sort of a butter ball with a knife. It just cuts through without making any impact whatsoever. So you just jump in and then come out, and there is some kind of a time warp. You don't even know how long you have meditated, and then you're out of it. There's no experience, there's nothing. If you really look at it, our path as we go along, values is just the beginning stream. As I mentioned about VCD, values is the initial phase of what we believe would help us to go through the path of whatever we choose. Values is not something that is, I would say, restricted only to Sahaj Marg or heartfulness practice. Today, even if you go into the corporate life, you will find that people speak about values and mission statements and the kind of values that we have to stand by while serving the customer and things like that. What exactly are values? Why do you need values? Do you even need values in the first place? These are the questions that we better answer before we go further to find what is character and then what is really DNA is all about. Let's say that whether it is heartfulness practice or even the Yama Niyama topic that is given to me, which is part of the Ashtanga yoga principles. Ashtanga yoga, as all of you most probably aware, is the 8 limbs of the yogic practice, which is postulated by Patanjali Mahamuni. And why is it postulated? If you really go through the multiple steps, he will take you from step 1 to step 8. And step 8 is all about getting into balance. Balance with nature, balance within yourself, within outside of yourself. The samadhi. The samadhi, as the word you would know, that comes from samadhi, the state which was there at the beginning of creation. If you're able to move to that stage, Patanjali considered that the journey is more or less complete for the soul for which it has come down into this world. For example, it gives a beautiful clue as to why Yama Niyama is at the bottom of the pyramid and why Samadhi is at the other end or the top end of the pyramid. Values, by definition, is something that makes the progress of our journey towards the goal much smoother. Let me rephrase it. Values is what makes our progress towards the goal much, much smoother than what it could be. In fact, without a goal, there's no point in having values. I always ask this question in all my leadership sessions. If you walk onto the main road outside your apartment or onto a highway and ask someone, where does this road go? The person in all probability would ask you, where do you want to go? Why would you have to know where I have to go before somebody else? Before I can be guided as to where I have to go. The same is true for the goal as well. If I don't know where I am going, any road will take me there. Values makes my journey much, much smoother and faster because I have seen people having a set of values. Values without goals is nothing but a set of rituals. Rituals, as you would understand, are practices which are not necessarily aligned to any specific goal attainment. Somebody did it, I do it. Somebody told me to do it, so I do it. Why are you doing? I don't know. I've been told to do this is what my parents did, this is what my grandparents did, this is what the society does, this is what my teacher told me to do, this is what my neighbors say, so it has to be right, so I do. And that's when we desist values. Values become much more easier for us to first understand, imbibe, and take it into our practice if we understand what is the purpose of values. For me personally, the values that I have seen in Sahaj Marg are values which helps me to go towards the goal much faster. If the values do not align with the goal that I have, there's no point in carrying those values at all. What could be the values that you could have? If you really look at the way in which Patanjali constructs the whole thing, he speaks about bringing clarity into 4 set of areas. If you really look at the 8 steps of the Ashtanga Yoga, you could bring them into finally 4 wide boxes. The first 2 steps could be clarified under the topic called as clarity of living. Finally, brings clarity to our life itself. The first 2 steps, the Yama and Niyama, is about bringing clarity of living. The second 2 steps, which are about asana and pranayama, is about bringing clarity for our health while we transit through this worldly phase. The third one, dharana and what you say as taking yourself inward, the clarity of thinking. This is what he brings in the 5th and 6th steps. And after you cross dharana and pratyahara is when you move into the last 2 stages, which is what gives the clarity to the soul, which is nothing but dhyana and samadhi. Out of that, we are only going to look at the first 2 steps of the Ashtanga Yoga, how it helps us to bring certain values. Whenever I read the values that have been proposed by the great Patanjali Mahamuni, one thing that I understand very clearly, which has been ratified many times by both Charji Maharaj and Daji, these are all frameworks for our reference. It doesn't mean that it will exactly work for you. It might not. But it is up to you to play the way in which you would play with a set of fresh clay given to us. We have to make our own building blocks to see what works for us. And for us to know whether it works or not, it is something that needs to align with my goals. What is my goal? Once I remember Charji Maharaj famously saying, if you ask 100 Abhyasis why they are in Sahaj Marg, you will get 110 reasons. That is the beauty of the system. That is also the boon and bane of the system, as we say. Many times, many people are not even clear as to why we are in this path. If you are clear in the path, it's easier to choose what we need to do. Would you just go to a bus stand and board any bus, or would you have very clear clarity in terms of where you are headed and choose the right bus? That would answer the question for you. If you look at the values as what Ashtanga Yoga, the first 2 steps says, Yama is about a very simple construct on which he brings certain values, 5 of them to be precise. He speaks about ethical and moral restraints. He does not, Daji always says, it's better not to keep on saying, don't do, but offer them restraints. It is something like a don't do list, but it is more for you to use the most important trait that we all have, which differentiates from other species. The human species has the ability to discriminate, what we would call as our ability to have viveka, the ability to choose between the right and the wrong. More than our ability to choose from the right and the wrong, it's our ability to choose the cause which will take us towards the effect that we should have clearly in our mind. The effect here is the results or the goal that we have to reach. The cause should be the inputs that would make our progress towards the goal much faster. This is what personally I have understood in my journey since I joined the mission in 1992. What I've understood in the last 32 years of the journey is that if the goal is clear, the input becomes much more clearer. When we also, very simply put, when we manage even time for that matter, which is something fixed for every one of us every day, 24 hours. But what we do in the 24 hours is purely our decision. And that decision purely depends on the goal for which you want to spend that day, which is in front of you. If that is clear, the time that I put in becomes much more focused. I'll spend more and more time in terms of what I would be doing, and I'll spend the least amount of time in what I should not be doing. What I should be doing should take me towards my goal. What I should not be doing are things which will take me away from my goal, whether it's reading a WhatsApp forward or watching a movie on an OTT platform, or just whiling away time instead of doing my sadhana as prescribed. Whatever be my goal, your goal may be different. Your goal may be the same as what the master would want you to have. It is up to you. So if you look at Yama, which is the ethical and moral restraints, or the Niyama, which is what Patanjali calls as positive observances, something like a to-do list. He only classifies two buckets finally there. He speaks about 5 Yamas, and then he speaks about 5 Niyamas. Let's look at Yamas. He only speaks about very simple things which we have been taught for ages till now. The first, he speaks about ahimsa, non-violence. It's not necessarily only about killing and stuff like that. Non-violence, as Daji beautifully says, starts from your thought level. Not even having to hurt someone. Love all, hurt none, as his famous quotation that he coined in 2016. It's about not being violent even at a thought or a word level. Practicing the principles of conversation as espoused by Lalaji Maharaj. The second Yama, what Patanjali offers is Satya, or being truthful. More than being truthful to others, are you truthful to yourself? Charji Maharaj always used to make fun, saying that you can run away from anybody else, everybody else, but you cannot run away from yourself, which is nothing but your conscience. Are you truthful to yourself? If you are truthful to yourself, if your conscience is clear, which means your point D doesn't come into play in our practice at all, the journey becomes much, much, much lighter. Chariji's famous joke is, which he used to say very often, is that if you tell a lie, you have to have a very sharp memory. Because every time you meet someone, you have to remember what you told that person in what context, when. Whereas when you speak the truth, there is nothing that you have to remember, because truth is always one and nothing but one. The third point in MI he speaks about is not stealing, or asteya. Not stealing seems to be a very simple word, but here stealing also means not just worldly stuff, but also the other stuff. Stealing the credit for the work done by others, stealing the efforts of somebody else. All these are things, virtues that adds to the values which takes you towards the goal. But we need to define the goal for that first. The fourth value he speaks about is being a person of moderation, brahmacharya. That's what he speaks in the fourth value in the Yama. And then he tops it off through the fifth value called as non-possessiveness or aparigraha. These are the 5 values he speaks about Yamas. These are, you can also turn them into positive to-do list. so that you can even move these 5 yamas into 5 niyamas by prescribing whatever suits you well. Let's look at the 5 niyamas that you shared after that. But prior to that, let's look at some benefits as to what would happen if you practice the yamas as prescribed exactly by Patanjali Mahamuni. He guarantees literally saying that it leads to inner peace. The recent global spirituality mahotsav that we had on the 15th, 16th, and 17th of March, it was all about moving from inner peace to global peace. And if you need global peace or world peace, you have to be peaceful inside. And this is exactly what Patanjali in the Yoga Sutra says very clearly, that you would accrue these benefits of being peaceful within yourself. Because you know the way the 10 commandments of Christianity would say, you would know that you haven't unnecessarily gone and touched somebody else's life in any negative way at all. You have lived a life which is perfectly at peace within yourself. And hence, you are a person who can become a messenger of peace to the world itself. The second point that he shares is that there is perfect harmony. Since you have a vibratory field that emanates out of the values that you carry and the practice of it, you sort of emanate a vibratory force of being harmonious with the people around you. People love to be around you. It is said that the sages in the past who used to live in the forest, lived among animals which are supposed to be the most dangerous, but they didn't find any threat in the presence of such sages or rishis because they lived harmoniously based on the values that they practiced. And then he says that you are able to have unconditional happiness by practicing the yamas as prescribed. And finally, he says that all these would bring a perfect balance between the external and the internal, the one outside, the one inside, which means you are at peace, you are harmonious, you are happy, and you are balanced, which means the first step of the Ashtanga Yoga Yama connects straight to the last step. If you make it as a circle, it takes you to the point of samadhi, which is nothing but balance, which means even in the first step itself, he sort of gives you the inputs in terms of what will help you to move to that level. Let's quickly look at the 5 niyamas and come back to the VCT concept for me to close it off and then take some question answers. In the 5 niyamas, which are what he calls as the to-do list, you can even make it as 10 yamas if you choose to, based on the current context, and move the 5 yamas and make the positive side of the 5 yamas and move them to the 5 niyamas. The first one, he speaks about being pure. The purity is all about saucha, is what he says. Being pure in your thoughts, being pure in your action. And Daji beautifully says that purity is all based on your intent. If your intent is clear, if your intent is clean, purity is an automatic choice or an output or an outcome. And then he speaks about being contented or santosha. Be happy under all circumstances. As Lord Krishna said, as Babri Maharaj said, be happy under all circumstances. If you had to make happiness as a conditional happiness, we all know it's quite easy to preach, difficult to practice. But the moment you make happiness conditional, you are never going to ever find happiness in your life. I'll be happy if I get this increment. I'll be happy if my spouse does this for me. I'll be happy if my father buys his latest gadget for me. I'll be happy if I get this promotion. You're never going to be happy because once you get that, you're only going to get to the next destination, which is the next destination of happiness, which you never reach. The third point he shares in the Niyamas is about being self-disciplined, or what we call as tapas. Charji Maharaj, how many times has he explained to us? A disciple is one who is disciplined. The word disciple comes from the one who is disciplined about what? Disciplined about what would help us move towards the goal. Whatever the masters share as the path, whatever we are able to imbibe as the practices, and whatever we are able to tenaciously practice becomes now part of what I would call as a value. And then we move to the next 2 letters, C and D. Let me come to that in a few moments. The fourth point that he speaks as 5 niyamas is the swadhyaya or self-study. Periodically, you need to I mean, the importance of diary writing cannot be overemphasized for any Abhyasi. Every day we have been told to write our diary after a sitting, after something important happens, if not anything else at the end of the day. When you write, it gives you a chance to study yourself, to see whether what is the goal that you have set for yourself. At the end of the day, have you at least moved 1 inch closer to the goal? Or have you swayed away from the goal? Or have you stagnated? It is time for you to reflect, even if you take a few minutes of time every day to self-study, Swadhyaya. That's what Patanjali says. Study periodically. Here in Sahaj Marg Heartfulness Practice, we say that you can study yourself daily at the time of writing a diary, or at the time of bedtime prayer, or prior to the bedtime prayer when you do the 10th maximum practice with offering 2 drops of eye water from the eye, the eye drops. When you really cry and say that I have not lived the life properly, please show me the right path for the tomorrow. Imagine what would happen when you wake up and then the day becomes better, where you go towards the goal faster. The day when Master is able to say that I haven't had such a disciple that who is able to change himself by looking within with the help of the masters. And then the last one automatically becomes the step which becomes what we call as surrender to the divine, or Ishvara Pranidhana. That's what Patanjali says. You're able to move to the level where now you have surrendered. The knowledge of surrender even ceases to exist, where you are very clear that now you become just an instrument in the hands of the God. Even in the first 2 steps, you become so pure that the rest of the practice becomes much easier. By practicing the Niyama, what Patanjali commits are 2 to 3 benefits he very clearly postulates. One, he says, is that there is a permanent inner cleanliness that you tend to maintain. The second is you become contented. The same thing that you saw in Yama benefits also, unconditional happiness. And then you get dedicated to practice. This is when really you know that now you're ready for practice. Not just practice, but a deeper practice that as we go along. If you really look for me, the fundamental question that comes here is, why should I practice the Yama or Niyama? What is in it for me? The famous American question, WIFM. Why should I do it? How do I benefit? Let's put it this way. If you lead a life without a goal, it's like going around in circles, not knowing where you are headed. In our countryside, you'll find a cow tied to a pole. It will be running around in circles only for oil to be made. The cow doesn't go anywhere. Likewise, we all wake up, go to bed. We all wake up, go to bed, not knowing exactly where we are going. The day we are very clear in terms of what our goal is, whether it's professional, whether it's personal, whether it is spiritual, when the goal becomes clear, the values which will take you towards the goal becomes clearer and clearer. All I would request you as one single exercise that you can do at the end of the session, either today, tomorrow, is what is the goal for which you think you are here in this world? Whether it's personal, professional, spiritual, you can have more than one goal, absolutely no harm. And then find what are the values which I would at any cost follow to reach that goal. And what are the values that I would despise or I will not do, Yama and Niyama, which will stop the progress of me towards the goal. When you're clear of that, the journey becomes much more smoother. What is in it for me is a very simple answer for my life, at least, is concerned. Whether it's following the 10 maxims. 10 maxims encapsulate all the Yamas and Niyamas in my view, though it is up to you for you to research on your own to find whether it actually really ties along. I have personally found that even if you're able to practice 3, 4 maxims, they actually tick off all the boxes for Yama and Niyama. Once that happens, you go into the second step of the VCD, which is what I call as character. Character is when you move into a conscious competence stage from a unconscious competence to conscious competence. Now I move into something called as I start practicing it rigorously. Character is when you are able to continuously practice, take feedback, and then you finally move to a level of a DNA. When do you say something is part of your DNA? Something is part of my DNA when it is my second nature. I don't need to think twice before how I respond. Response becomes an automatic extension of what I am. If you ask a sportsman, a cricketer, or a footballer, they'll automatically either kick a ball or play a shot without even having to think of it because they have practiced it so much, it has become part of their blood. It is now encoded literally into the system. So when it becomes a DNA, nobody needs to remind me what my value system is. A value system, it has to be reminded, which means that you haven't yet started encoding it into part of your system. When you start encoding, it becomes deeper and deeper, it becomes your character. When it's so deeply encoded, it is next to impossible for the DNA to be changed. It becomes now part of a mutated DNA, which will take you towards the goal faster. So welcome to this journey of Yama Niyama, where you find the purpose of why you are here, find the values as exposed by whether it's Patanjali Muni or in 10 maxims or the various inputs given by the masters. Pick what works for you. Make a set of values that you do, that you will not do. Let it become part of your character, and one day let it become part of your DNA so that the journey towards the goal becomes faster and smoother. Thank you for the opportunity. Now I'll pause to take questions or go into breakout rooms as you feel is apt.